At a grand noble gathering, Alan was avoided by everyone, labeled cruel despite having no powers. Only a red-haired villainess dared approach him, surprising him with her interest. Compared to his family, she was even more dangerous. But unexpectedly, she became interested in Alan and wanted to talk with him more. What Alan didn't know was that the 5 children he had adopted were eliminating anyone who threatened his peace, even kingdom-level foes, while he thought they were just living quietly. When the villainess later returned home, she found the spy she'd sent on Alan dead, and for the first time feared that terrifying rumors about him might be true. A decade into the future, the mighty Federation Kingdom of the East is fated to crumble, destroyed by the emergence of the 5 great sins, a catastrophe that will bring the entire realm to ruin. To avert this grim destiny, the protagonist has taken on the role of their mysterious benefactor, yet what began as a desperate act of intervention soon spirals into a far greater ordeal than he ever imagined. Once, he had been an ordinary man, an overworked office drone from the modern world, barely surviving on caffeine and 78-hour work weeks. But by a twist of fate, he awakens in the body of a noble in a fantastical realm. At first, it feels like a dream come true. However, his euphoria doesn't last long. He soon realizes he can't even read the local language and possesses no special abilities. Trying to act natural, he picks up a book, only for the butler to stare in disbelief because he's holding it upside down. Later, during a lavish meal, the young maids serve him an extravagant feast. He devours it with delight, savoring his luxurious new life. They even help him bathe, and he can't help but marvel at how incredible it feels to be pampered as a young master of a count's family. For the first time in his life, he feels like he's in paradise. But paradise comes with a problem. He has no idea where he is. Normally, when someone finds themselves in a fantasy world, it's one they know from a book or a game. Then one of the maids mentions that his elder brothers, Leo and Tonio, will be returning the next day. The names sound oddly familiar. As he racks his brain, the realization hits him like lightning. He's inside Psychedelia, a turn-based RPG he used to play in his free time. And this is bad. In Psychedelia, no matter what choices the player makes, the moment the 5 great sins, wrath, greed, sloth, pride, and obsession appear, the world begins its descent into chaos. Nobles betray each other, cities burn, and the kingdom collapses. The Palacio family, whose body he now inhabits, was infamous in the game for its downfall early in the story. The eldest son, Leo Palacio, was known as the king of prostitutes, and the second son, Tonio, ruled the drug trade. That means the protagonist has become the third son, the useless extra villain, Alan Palacio, a character who dies before the main story even begins. Realizing this, he drops to his knees in despair. He'd rather return to his exhausting corporate job than face certain death in a doomed world. But soon, an idea sparks within him. Since he already knows the events of the future, couldn't he change it? If he can prevent the birth of the 5 great sins, he might be able to save not just the world, but his own comfortable life. After all, the sins are still just children at this point. 2 months later, his plans are already in motion. His trusted aide, Evan, reports that the mission to rescue orphans from a human experimentation facility was a success. Among the children is a girl named Utia, who now manages the orphanage. The protagonist silently nods, satisfied that choosing Evan for this task was the right call, though his expressionless face makes it hard for others to read his emotions. Trying to ease the tension, he forces a smile, but the result is awkward at best. Evan can't help but think how strange his young master has become. Alan used to wear his emotions openly, but now his face seems frozen, as if even smiling has become a foreign act. Evan, however, accepts his master's praise and continues his report. The protagonist muses internally that Evan is one of the few truly loyal and upright people in Psychedelia, a rare find in a world full of deceit. That's exactly why he made him his subordinate early on. Evan then mentions that Utia, despite her gentle nature, possesses a mysterious strength beyond human understanding. He's baffled that such a powerful girl accepted her captivity without resistance. He also wonders aloud why the young master didn't bring her to the estate. Alan agrees that it might seem strange, but inwardly he knows this decision is crucial. Utia's fate in the original timeline was to forge a contract with another worldly entity and become the embodiment of wrath, one of the 5 great sins responsible for countless deaths. By letting her live peacefully at the orphanage, he hopes to change that outcome, to give her a life untainted by hatred or violence. He believes he's just diffused one of the 5 ticking disasters that would have doomed the world, but he can't reveal any of this to Evan. Instead, he puts on a mysterious air and says simply, "The time isn't right yet." Evan, puzzled but obedient, nods. The protagonist then instructs him to provide the orphanage with generous funding so the children can live comfortably. Then, he handed Evan a neatly folded handwritten letter, instructing him to deliver it to Utia. When Evan curiously asked about the letter's purpose, the young master casually dismissed it, claiming it was merely a way to check up on her, to offer comfort after everything she had endured. Evan nodded, promising to deliver it personally before galloping off on his horse. Left alone, Alan Palatio leaned back in thought. He wasn't entirely sure whether the letter would truly bring Utia any peace, but it was worth a try. Hidden within the message were fragments of quotes he remembered from the psychedelia game. In one of the game's pivotal scenes, when Utia had already become the embodiment of wrath, an archbishop mentioned a peculiar incantation, something about casting a spell of agony from the dark with the brightness of belonging to the fall. He never really understood what it meant, but in the game, that strange phrase had briefly calmed Utia's fury. Unfortunately, it came too late. Moments later, she killed the archbishop, and her uncontrollable rage consumed the entire kingdom. This time, Alan hoped things would be different. It wasn't too late now, and perhaps, just perhaps, those same words might guide her toward peace. Feeling somewhat optimistic, he decided that since wrath was taken care of for now, it was time to shift his focus to the next landmine. Still, he couldn't help but find it ridiculous that he was trying to befriend potential monsters using little more than poetic quotes from a game. But if the Sins truly revered some ancient deity, then maybe, just maybe, these words would mean something to them. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Kids worshipping a mysterious god who grants them power. It all sounded insane. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the orphanage, Utia unfolded the letter. Her crimson eyes scanned the words, and her expression remained cold and unreadable. Evan, standing nearby, couldn't help but feel uneasy. The mana radiating from her was so immense that the air itself trembled. He'd fought monsters and mercenaries alike, yet nothing compared to this small girl's overwhelming aura. Utia's voice cut through the silence. "Did Lord Alan send this?" she asked softly. Evan confirmed with a nod. The next instant, her mana burst forth like a violent storm. The ground quaked, and Evan instinctively stepped back. Her expression twisted in frustration. She was furious that Alan hadn't invited her to the estate. For a moment, she seemed ready to obliterate everything in sight. The sheer density of her mana was terrifying, forming tangible waves of energy, a feat only those in the Master Realm could achieve. Evan remembered Alan's words. "It's not the right time yet." He repeated them carefully, praying they would somehow work, and miraculously they did. Utia paused, her expression softening as she reread the quote Alan had included. To her, it wasn't just a random line, it was a promise, one only she and her master could understand. Her rage subsided, though the madness still lingered behind her eyes. Evan could only stare in disbelief. He had no idea what kind of strange bond existed between his young master and this terrifying girl. Utia, now smiling faintly, whispered, "I understand what he meant." In that moment, she looked less like a child and more like a goddess of destruction in human form, the bloody Queen Utia, daughter of monsters and vessel of wrath. Back at the Palatio estate, Alan lay comfortably on his bed, blissfully unaware of the chaos his letter had nearly caused. He believed he had successfully extended his peaceful life by another day. As he closed his eyes, he looked out at the moonlit sky and imagined it cheering him on. He promised himself to work hard on rescuing the next child. The next morning, he found himself in the library surrounded by towering shelves and piles of books that seemed determined to fall on his head. For an illiterate man, it felt like the library itself was mocking him. He was desperately searching for clues about the third sin, but the endless reading was giving him a headache. Just then, Evan entered and reported that they had successfully rescued the second child. Thanks to Alan's prior intel, they had found her at an underground slave market. Evan explained that the girl was treated with the utmost care, but before he could finish, the door suddenly flew open with a thunderous crash. The one who barged in was none other than Tonio Palatio, the second son. With his usual arrogant smirk, he sneered at Alan. "How's an illiterate fool like you pretending to read, huh?" he taunted. Alan merely stared back with half-lidded, unimpressed eyes. Internally he sighed. What a pain. Tonio, irritated by his calm attitude, stomped closer, demanding answers. Alan could practically feel his headache worsening. Fighting back would only make things messy, so he decided to play it cool. If you're here to use the library, I'll take my leave, he said flatly. Tonio smirked triumphantly and pressed his boot against Alan's head, thinking he had completely humiliated him. But before Alan could respond, a knife whistled through the air and buried itself in the wall beside them. Both of you, quiet down, came a cold voice. Standing at the doorway was Leo Paletio, the eldest son, the infamous king of prostitutes. His sharp eyes flicked between his two younger brothers, his tone dripping with authority. As Leo and Tonio began exchanging insults, Alan took the opportunity to quietly crawl away. Perfect, he thought. Let the idiots kill each other. He reflected on how, in the game, the Paletio family had vanished right after the first subquest. Now that he was living among them, he realized they were far more dangerous and influential than the game ever portrayed. Both Leo and Tonio were power-hungry scoundrels, the former ruling the underworld's pleasure districts, the latter commanding an empire of narcotics. Their rivalry was nothing short of a ticking time bomb. As the two brothers continued to bicker, Alan made his escape. He wasn't about to get caught in their crossfire. He had one goal and one goal only, to survive long enough to enjoy his life of luxury. Outside the library, Evan caught up with him and calmly brushed the dust from his young master's hair, as if this were all a normal occurrence. Alan sighed and muttered to himself, I'll live happily as a useless, weak, and incompetent bastard child. And for now, that sounded like the perfect plan. Later, Evan mentioned that the second child they had rescued didn't seem like an ordinary kid either. As he glanced at his lazy master lounging before him, Evan couldn't help but question how someone like this even discovered the illegal slave market and the underground bioexperiments spread throughout the kingdom. It made him doubt his own perception of reality. Watching this carefree master, he wondered how hard it must be for him to act normal in front of his brothers, while Alam simply muttered about being exhausted. Switching the topic, Evan asked again why his master had sent the second child to an orphanage, but the truth was something far deeper. This child wasn't ordinary in the slightest. Within the great United Kingdom, made up of several nations, the central realm was the Kalian Kingdom, home of the second child they rescued from the slave market. His name was Deus Macalian, once the second boss of Psychedelia. Sold into slavery and tortured beyond reason, Deus eventually became the embodiment of one of the 5 deadly sins, sloth. Yet despite this title, he wasn't idle at all. In fact, Deus was infamous for his tireless resolve, known for repaying debts and grudges many times over. His reign of destruction across the kingdom had left players horrified by his twisted sense of justice. That's why the protagonist had insisted Evan treat Deus with the utmost care and respect. The memory of Deus's brutal boss fights still haunted the protagonist. Even recalling them sent chills down his spine. Trying to sound mysterious, he simply told Evan that the timing wasn't right yet. Evan, half expecting that answer, nodded in understanding. Then he asked if the letter sent to Utia was about the second child. The protagonist confirmed, but in reality, the letter was nothing more than a rant about how his older brothers were bullying him. It was hilariously petty, yet strangely charming. He claimed in the letter that Utia should look after the second child since he wasn't feeling well, and, in a sense that wasn't a lie, Deus truly did need time to recover. Meanwhile, at the orphanage, Deus tried to stay out of sight. Hiding the scars covering his body, Utia approached him curiously and asked if he was broken. When she mentioned the Black Goat organization, Deus flinched at the name. Slipping into a yander-like state, Utia told him that even if he was broken, he had still been chosen by the Blue Moon, a name they used to refer to the protagonist. Utia spoke of forming a new order with the Blue Moon as its leader. She promised Deus that if he stayed loyal and obeyed, he would one day have his revenge. Her words ignited a spark inside the quiet boy, something long buried beneath despair. With that matter settled, Utia decided to write her first letter back, and for reasons unknown, she seemed overly excited about it. Back at the Palatio estate, the protagonist was buried in books inside the library, searching for leads about the third child. Suddenly, Evan burst through the doors, panic written all over his face. "We're in serious trouble," he exclaimed. The news hit like a thunderbolt. The second young master, Tonio, was dead. Although the protagonist had anticipated this outcome, the speed of events caught him off guard. The funeral was held almost immediately, but what shocked everyone wasn't Tonio's death. It was the utter lack of grief. Even their father arrived with 2 prostitutes at his side, drugged and laughing. The protagonist could only stare in disbelief. This family had always been rotten, but this was depravity on another level. He mused bitterly that psychedelia truly deserved its dark fantasy label. Still, something about Tonio's accidental fall didn't sit right in the game. Leo had broken down crying after killing his brother, screaming about becoming the heir of Count Palacio, but now Leo was grinning beside the corpse. The protagonist could only shake his head, thinking at least pretend to be sad. Idiot. But this family drama wasn't his main concern. His true focus lay on unraveling the mystery of the 5 deadly sins. A year passed, and Leo had inherited Tonio's shady business empire, bringing a strange peace to the county. During that time, Utia and the protagonist continued to exchange letters, growing surprisingly close. Their correspondence often contained updates about the orphanage and the children, which made him smile. In one letter, Utia included a list of their monthly sponsors, and he noticed it had grown significantly. It made him suspicious, though Evan, busy chewing on bread, remarked that it was a good sign regardless. Then finally Evan delivered the long-awaited message. The Information Guild had contacted them. They had located the ancient book connected to the 3rd child. The revelation thrilled the protagonist. He could finally uncover the truth behind that hidden danger. For the first time in a while, everything seemed to fall into place. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the continent, at a drug distribution base known as Margo, a few of Leo's subordinates were bragging about how generous the eldest member of the Palacio family was, always rewarding them handsomely. Because of his support, their organization had expanded to hundreds of members.
However, their confidence would soon turn into sheer terror. In an instant, chaos erupted. Their bodies twisted uncontrollably, as if invisible strings were pulling them, forcing them to end their own lives. The ones behind this massacre were none other than the main character's children, Utia and Deus. With precise control over his thread magic, Deus effortlessly wiped out the entire base. Glancing at Utia, he asked whether there was any real purpose in killing these weaklings. Utia simply replied by asking if he truly pitied them. Deus answered coldly that he didn't, not for people who destroyed countless lives for their drug trade. To him, this had nothing to do with revenge. But Utia, releasing her magic, explained that this was necessary for their master's return. They were merely clearing the filth from the land, so that when their master rose as the rightful heir, the path would already be cleansed. With a graceful smile, she remarked that they couldn't possibly leave the land looking this shabby for his arrival. Deus nodded, saying he understood, though deep down he didn't fully grasp her conviction. With a wave of her hand, Utia carved a glowing symbol into the ground. As they ascended into the night sky, she declared that everything would proceed according to his will. A powerful surge of mana erupted, leaving behind a luminous crescent moon symbol. Utia smiled faintly and said that they were the blue moon, destined to become his blade.
It had been 2 years since the main character and Utia began exchanging letters. During that time, Evan had been tirelessly tracking down the remaining sins. Exhausted, he finally collapsed on the grass, only for the main character's magic to restore his strength. Evan brought good news. They had successfully located the 5th child and sent them to the orphanage. Even though the main character remained expressionless, inside, he felt deeply moved. Over the past 2 years, he had managed to save all 3 remaining children, meaning that all 5 sins were now safe. To reward Evan's efforts, he treated him to cake and sweets, mentioning that locating the sin of greed, the 3rd child, had been particularly troublesome. Still, with Evan's help and his game knowledge, they pulled through. He praised Evan sincerely for his dedication. With the mission complete, he finally felt a rare sense of relief. Evan asked if that meant all the orphanage matters were settled, and the main character confirmed it. Evan sighed in relief but quickly noticed his master didn't seem as happy as expected. When questioned, the main character insisted that he was smiling, though his blank face betrayed him. Even with a close-up, there wasn't the faintest trace of emotion. Evan simply accepted it, having grown used to his master's stoic demeanor. As they continued walking, the main character reflected on how unexpectedly smooth things had gone. The bosses of psychedelia had become the 5 great sins because of their tragic pasts. Saving them before their downfall had seemed nearly impossible, and he had worried that even if he reached them, their hearts might already be too shattered to heal. He asked Evan about the orphanage's condition, and Evan handed him a letter stating that everything was going well. The children, once like broken dolls, were now full of life. The main character commented that if that were true, they wouldn't even need a caretaker. He hadn't expected Yutia to manage the orphanage so effectively, and wondered if her past had something to do with it. In the game, she had always been emotionally attached to that place. He admitted that Yutia had a kind side after all, but Evan urged him to read the rest of the letter. Inside, Yutia described how the children were thriving, reassuring him that even Deus, who had been the most unstable, was improving rapidly. For the first time in a long while, a soft smile crossed his face. He expressed that he was simply glad the children were growing up well. Deep down, he thought perhaps the environment itself had played a huge role in their recovery. Evan then asked when he planned to meet the children in person. Though the main character said someday, he secretly admitted to himself that he had no plans to meet them anytime soon. He knew how dangerous their personalities could become after all. He'd seen what they were capable of in the game. Still, saving them before their corruption had given him a small glimmer of hope. He decided that meeting them in about 5 years might be best. For now, he needed power, strength to protect himself in this cruel world, and that meant mastering magic. While practicing, he silently thanked fate that the body he now inhabited possessed magical talent. Just then, Evan mentioned a mysterious group called the Blue Moon. The main character frowned, admitting he had never heard of them. Evan explained that they had been purging criminal organizations across the land. The main character thought that sounded like a good thing, though he couldn't shake the feeling that this organization didn't exist in the game. He doubted they would last long, but Evan teased that he should be worried. The Blue Moon was known for targeting nobles. A chill ran down his spine as he ordered Evan to sleep next to his room from now on, just in case. Back at the orphanage, Yutia was presiding over the weekly Blue Moon report meeting. The first to speak was the Sin of Pride, Solrang, who cheerfully announced that she had dealt with every slave trader in her region by simply cutting off their heads. Spinning mid-air in a display of agility, she laughed that none of those fools ever discovered who she truly was. She even mocked them, saying she'd offered a chance at mercy if they could guess the color of her eyes, yet not one managed to answer correctly. Next came Rinna, the Sin of Greed, whose calm and graceful demeanor contrasted sharply with Xiorang's wild energy. In a soft voice, she reported that all the bodies had been disposed of properly, dissolved into nothingness, no trace left behind. Then came Radan, the Sin of Misophobia, who proudly stated that he had finished cleaning up the southern sector, dismantling the illegal human testing facilities and reducing the perpetrators from Avalon into minced meat. The sheer brutality of these children was chilling. Yutia, their leader, was the most terrifying of them all. She commended their efficiency with a serene smile, reminding them that every action must align with his will. She repeated that their very existence served the Great Moon, the Blue Moon, the being they revered above all, who just happened to be their master, the main character himself. Suddenly, Deus raised an issue, breaking the rhythm of the meeting. Yutia turned toward him, curious what could have possibly gone wrong when everything seemed to be running perfectly under their divine master's guidance. Deus explained that during his sweep in the south, he had uncovered a troubling document, a written order signed by none other than Leo, the eldest son of Count Palatio and the head of Avalon. The order was clear. Leo intended to eliminate their father first, and then slowly poison their master. The moment Yutia heard this, a suffocating wave of killing intent filled the room. Her fury was overwhelming, forcing the other sins to tremble and avert their eyes. How dare anyone scheme against their beloved master? 2 years passed. Count Palatio was dead. Officially, the cause was listed as heart failure, but the main character knew better. It was an overdose. During the funeral, Leo received word that one of his facilities had just been destroyed by the Blue Moon. The timing was so ironic, it was almost comedic. Couldn't they have waited until after the ceremony? Leo muttered in frustration, asking if the attackers had wiped out everyone again. Standing nearby, the main character listened quietly, realizing that his brother was growing increasingly paranoid about this mysterious group, never once suspecting that it was his own creation. The funeral ended without a single genuine tear, and as soon as it was over, he slipped away before Leo's sharp, calculating glare could reach him. Evan approached him afterward, asking what he planned to do next. since Leo was clearly about to inherit the title of Count. But the main character was already ahead of him. He was packing his belongings and instructed Evan to do the same. When Evan asked if he really intended to flee, the main character clarified that it wasn't a full escape, just a temporary retreat, a quiet stay in southern town of Rodmill. Rodmill, he explained, was small, peaceful, and far from the chaos of noble politics. It was the perfect hideout. Besides, Leo's recent suspicious behavior made it clear that staying home was too dangerous. Once they reached Rodmill, life slowed down beautifully. The main character actually found himself enjoying it, cooking golden brown toast in the morning while Evan calmly accepted their new routine like it was completely normal. But their peace lasted only 3 days. News arrived that Leo was dead. The main character was forced to return home for another funeral, though this time he could barely hide his disbelief. In the original game, Leo wasn't supposed to die yet. The cause of death, a stab to the heart, left him uneasy. Who would kill Leo now? When he tried asking the servants about the details, they screamed in terror as if death itself had walked into the room. Every servant acted strangely, bowing repeatedly, apologizing and treating him with an almost worshipful fear, as though he were a mafia don. Confused, he turned to Evan and asked if he knew what was going on. Evan, suppressing a grin, admitted that he might have an idea. He teasingly asked if the main character had anything to do with the sudden disappearance of the Avalon drug syndicate. After all, Leo had been its secret leader, and now both he and the organization were gone without a trace. The story then flashed back to the day they left for Rodmill. Inside the carriage, Evan had asked why they were heading for such a small town instead of a bustling city. The main character answered simply that the city wasn't an option. Rodmill, he explained, was the final stage of his plan, the place where everything would eventually come together. His mission was clear: to save the 5 great sins from their destined tragedies and stop the world from collapsing. And since Rodmill wasn't even part of the original storyline, it was the safest place he could hide. It also came with a villa, a quiet estate perfect for a noble who wanted to live peacefully, away from all the scheming. For once he could rest, do nothing, and enjoy the silence.
When Evan joked that his master always had a reason for every decision, the main character replied with his usual calm line, "Everything I do has a purpose." But Evan, now too familiar with his master's evasions, laughed and said, "You always say that when you're trying to dodge my questions." The main character blinked in surprise, realizing that his loyal companion had learned to see right through his carefully crafted facade. As Alan's carriage rolled away from the estate, Leo watched from the balcony, deep in thought. He debated whether to let his younger brother go or end his life right then and there. In truth, it made little difference to him. He had already arranged to poison Alan, ensuring his death would be slow and quiet. But now that Alan had chosen to leave for the borderlands, Leo reasoned that the plan no longer mattered. Still, something inside him whispered that letting Alan live was a mistake. Unable to shake the feeling, Leo called for his most trusted subordinate, Alman, and ordered him to follow the carriage. Alman, however, hesitated for the first time in years. "Do you want me to kill him, my lord?" he asked. The question startled Leo. Alman had never questioned an order before. He was the perfect soldier, silent, obedient, and efficient. For him to ask now felt wrong. Leo's eyes narrowed. "Your job is to follow my commands," he reminded sharply. But before he could finish, Alman stepped forward and drove a blade straight through Leo's chest. The Count's air froze in disbelief, gasping for air as he stared at his killer. "Why?" he croaked. Alman, his expression calm and almost serene, whispered, "Because I enjoy the game of war." In that moment, the truth was revealed. Alman was not who he seemed. His real name was hidden, a secret operative of the Blue Moon. Wiping the blood from his blade, he explained their creed. The Blue Moon, he said, was created to serve as Alan's sword, carrying out his will across the continent. Their only rule was simple: if anyone threatened their master, they had the right to eliminate that threat, even if it meant acting on their own. Hidden smirked bitterly. "I waited 2 years for this day," he muttered, looking down at Leo's dying form. "If only you hadn't tried to harm our great master, you might have lived a little longer." Leo tried to speak, but the light in his eyes faded before he could utter another word. As his body slumped to the floor, Hidden turned away, murmuring, "With your death, Avalon dies with you."
Far from the chaos, Alan was living the life he had always dreamed of in the quiet town of Rodmill. He rose whenever he pleased, enjoyed warm breakfast with Evan, and spent his days doing absolutely nothing of importance. The picture of a carefree noble, but peace never lasted long in Alan's world. 4 days later, a letter arrived bearing the Palazzo family seal. The message was short and crushing. He was to return home immediately and assume the title of Count. His quiet, idyllic life had ended before it even had a chance to begin. Back at the estate, something felt strange. The servants avoided eye contact, bowing excessively whenever Alan passed. Their behavior made his skin crawl. Evan, ever the tease, chuckled and asked, "So when did you become the new shadow leader?" Alan blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Evan grinned. "You really don't know? The whole county believes you orchestrated your brother's death. You left the estate, Leo was killed, and now everything falls neatly into your hands. If that doesn't look suspicious, I don't know what does." Alan groaned, sinking into his chair dramatically. "Why does this always happen to me? I didn't do anything." Evan, suppressing a laugh, pointed out that people naturally suspected him. After all, he was the one who benefited most. The timing, the inheritance, the power vacuum, it all worked too perfectly in his favor. Realizing his attempt to avoid trouble had somehow backfired, Alan felt a surge of frustration. Evan tried to comfort him, saying that with Leo gone and the Avalon drug syndicate wiped out, things would finally calm down. Then, with a mischievous grin, he added, "Congratulations, my lord. You are now the infamous Shadow Ruler who supposedly assassinated a swordmaster." Alan scowled. "A swordmaster? Seriously?" "Apparently so," Evan replied. "Even a man like Leo had quite a reputation." Sighing, Alan tried to make sense of it all. He asked if Evan had heard any news about the organization that had been hunting down other crime groups. Evan tilted his head. "You mean the Blue Moon?" Alan nodded, his mind racing. Could they have been the ones responsible for Leo's death and Avalon's destruction? But Evan shook his head. "The Information Guild says otherwise. Blue Moon never leaves bodies behind, only their symbol, a crescent mark under the moonlight. Whoever killed Leo left corpses, all stabbed through the heart. That's not their style." Alan frowned, the pieces refusing to fit together. "Then who did it?" he muttered. Evan chuckled darkly. "Who knows? Maybe the road to hell just opened, and we're standing right at its gate." But as Alan sat there, lost in thought, one truth nagged at him. In all his game knowledge, there was never supposed to be an organization called the Blue Moon, which meant something or someone was rewriting fate itself. The scene shifts to a secluded orphanage at the outskirts of the capital, where Utia sat at the head of a long wooden table, her small frame cloaked in an aura of quiet menace. Around her were gathered the other great sins, the most formidable members of the Blue Moon. "Did everything proceed as planned?" she asked, her voice soft yet commanding. Rin, the sin of greed, nodded with a faint smile. "Not a single trace remains. Every trail has been erased." Sioran, embodying pride, added coolly, "Same here. None survived. Only corpses remain." Then Deus, ever boastful, leaned back in his chair with a smug grin. 486 Avalon soldiers all gone. My magic danced among them like a butterfly caught in its own web. Radan, the sin of misophobia, gave a curt nod. "I sliced through half their forces myself. The rest were already dead before I got there." Utia's eyes gleamed faintly, a mixture of approval and cold detachment. "You've all done well," she said, though even her praise carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. And just like that, Avalon, the most feared drug syndicate in the Asteria Kingdom, a name that once brought doom to nations, was annihilated in a mere 5 days. But the silence didn't last. Rodan broke it, his tone uneasy. "I wouldn't call it perfect. During cleanup, I found something strange. Documents tied to noble families, especially the Altia Dukedom." At once, Utia's expression hardened and the air grew heavy. Her magic flared like invisible flames rattling the table. "You all know what that means," she said coldly. "We eliminate them." Rodan bowed slightly. "Understood. I'll handle it quietly." With that settled, Utia turned to Reyna, the sin of sloth. "What about the Information Guild? Are they clean?" Reyna brushed a lock of hair from her eyes. "We're still verifying. Those guilds are all the same. Tools built by the Swordmaster himself like forged hellblades." Reyna hesitated before asking, "Should we continue monitoring that noble Alan Palatio?" Utia nodded sharply. "Yes. Do not let this situation reach his ears. I've said this before, none of you are to forget." When she said that person, they all knew who she meant. Alan, their moon, the one they existed to protect. Deus frowned slightly. "But Lady Utia, his family struck first. The order to kill them wasn't issued by him." At that, Utia's calm facade cracked. Her magic flickered violently as panic crept into her voice. "No, our actions must only come from his command. We are blades, not thinkers. A sword that acts on its own is a broken one." Her declaration echoed through the hall. The other sins exchanged uneasy glances. From this moment, Yutia continued, her voice trembling between rage and reverence, every member of the Blue Moon will act only on direct orders. Do not fail him. Do not disappoint our moon. A tense silence followed before Deus finally nodded. Understood. Still, he couldn't help but wonder, what kind of man could inspire such fear in someone as powerful as Yutia? Meanwhile, back in the Palacio estate, Alan was drowning in an endless sea of documents. Ever since Leo's funeral, he had spent nearly a month suffocating under the weight of bureaucratic duties. I just wanted to relax and live easy, he muttered miserably, wiping a tear from his cheek. Isn't that what nobles are supposed to do? He leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed, realizing how completely unprepared he was for his new role. Leo's death, which, in his memories of the original timeline, wasn't supposed to happen for another 6 years, had thrown everything off balance. Just then, several county ministers entered his office, arms stacked with even more paperwork. Alan blinked in horror. Just put it there, he sighed, waving them toward his desk. The ministers froze. To them, his tired eyes and blank expression radiated pure intimidation. They bowed deeply, terrified they had somehow angered the new count. Rumors whispered that Alan Palacio was a ruthless genius, a hidden puppeteer who crushed anyone who displeased him. If only they knew. In reality, Alan was already plotting how to dump all this work back on them. Later that night, Evan dropped by and nearly dropped his drink upon learning that Alan had reached second tier in magic after only 2 years of self-study in poisoncraft. Wait, 2 years? That's insane, Evan said, wide-eyed. Most people take 5 just to get halfway there. Alan grinned sheepishly. Guess I'm a bit of a genius. But deep down, he knew the truth. His progress wasn't born from arrogance. It was desperation. Something in his gut told him danger was approaching. If he couldn't defend himself, he'd die. His mana control was precise, but his reserves were painfully small, barely enough to sustain basic spells. What's the point of skill if I run dry after 2 minutes? He muttered. Mana, he realized, was like an athlete's body. Some were born prodigies, others weren't. No amount of training could fully change that. Still, Alan refused to give up. Somewhere out there, he believed, was a way to fix his limited capacity. His thoughts were interrupted as Evan strolled in again, waving an envelope. Good news, my lord. Your invitation to the royal ball has arrived. Alan blinked. The what now?
A few days later, the scene unfolds at the Grand Ball, where Alan Palacio makes his entrance, draped in elegant royal blue attire that shimmers under the chandelier's glow. His appearance is nothing short of majestic, the perfect image of nobility, though the man beneath the finery is already mentally exhausted. For someone who preferred quiet solitude, this kind of gathering felt more like a trial than a celebration. The ball itself was a dazzling display of aristocratic vanity, a grand event in the southern provinces of the Asteria Kingdom, where nobles mingled, exchanged pleasantries, and measured each other's worth through gossip and gold. Since Alan was soon to be officially appointed as Count, attending was unavoidable. Still, he told himself this was an opportunity, a chance to form alliances, win favor, and pave the way for the peaceful life he desired. Unfortunately, things didn't go quite as planned. From the moment he entered, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence, eyes darted away, and nobles began to quietly step aside as if making space for a storm. Even when Alan tried to greet them with a polite wave, they only flinched and scurried off. Evan, his ever-cheerful companion, patted his shoulder. Don't take it personally, my lord. They're probably just nervous around new blood. Alan forced a small smile. Nervous? They look like they've seen a ghost. Determined not to give up, he decided to blend in and start small talk. Yet, unaware of how intimidating his expression could be, every attempt only made things worse. His face, perpetually calm and unreadable, made his polite gestures appear menacing. Spotting a lady nearby, he picked up a glass of wine and remarked, "This has quite the distinct aroma. I'd love to have a few bottles at home." He thought his smile looked charming. The poor woman, however, saw the grin of a devil. Panicking, she stammered, "Oh, of course. I'll tell my father to send them right away," and fled the hall as if her life depended on it. To the other nobles watching, it looked like Count Alan Palacio had just coerced a terrified lady into surrendering her family's prized wine collection. Whispered rumors began to spread like wildfire that he was blackmailing nobles under the guise of polite conversation. Evan, biting back laughter, whispered, "Well, congratulations. You're now the proud owner of rare vintage wine and the most feared man in the room." Alan sighed. She must have been shy, that's all. But the pattern repeated. Every person he approached offered him extravagant gifts in panic. a luxury stallion from Palladian, a box of Pania citrus tea, even rare gemstones, all in exchange for being left alone. Alan couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. As the night wore on, he sulked near a marble pillar, while Evan happily sampled the buffet, teasing, "You should attend more parties. At this rate, you'll have an entire estate furnished by terrified nobles." Alan groaned. Wonderful. A noble by title, a villain by rumor. Indeed, with whispers claiming he'd murdered both his brothers to seize the family title. His reputation had turned monstrous. Seeking relief, he excused himself and stepped out onto the balcony for some air. A young woman with radiant red hair, standing beneath the moonlight. A gentle voice called from behind him. "Excuse me, do you have a moment?" Alan turned, scanning the empty terrace before looking down to find a petite girl gazing up at him. Her silver eyes were wide yet steady. "I'm Loria Altia," she introduced herself softly, third daughter of Duke Altia. The name made Alan's pulse quicken. Altia, one of the 3 shadow families from the Psychedelia game. He recognized the name instantly and frowned. She wasn't supposed to exist. Or rather, she must have died before the game's timeline began. Loria bowed slightly. "I need your help, my lord. I believe someone will try to kill me soon." Alan blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. "Kill you?" She nodded. "My father's health is failing, and his legitimate daughters, they want me gone. I've been living under the protection of his mistress, but that won't last much longer." Her voice trembled just enough to betray her fear, and Alan felt a pang of familiarity. The struggle for inheritance, the looming betrayal, it all mirrored his own painful past. Loria stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "Please, Count Palacio, I know you're strong. If you protect me, I'll share half of the Altia family fortune with you." For a moment, Alan hesitated. Despite her desperation, he knew he couldn't afford to get involved. He barely had enough magic to defend himself, much less protect someone else. "I'm sorry," he said, finally, his tone gentle but firm. "You'd be safer finding someone else." Loria's expression fell, the light in her eyes dimming. Yet she smiled faintly. "I understand. Thank you for at least listening." Alan turned and walked away, feeling a twinge of guilt settle in his chest. No matter how he tried to justify it, he couldn't shake the image of her lonely figure under the moonlight. If things were different, he thought, I might have helped her. Before stepping back into the grand ballroom, he spoke loudly. "Good luck, Loria. You'll find reliable ally." As he steps into the glittering crowd, Deus and Rena, who had been discreetly observing from a distance, exchanged thoughtful glances. The situation had taken an unexpected turn now that a member of the Altia family had personally approached their master. Deus considered whether they should inform the Red Moon, their code name for Udia, about this new development. However, Rind calmly assured him that there was no need for concern. According to their intelligence, Loria Altia was the only member of a family not connected to the criminal syndicate Avalon, meaning she posed no threat. With Radan, the man burdened with the sin of meophobia, already tasked with eradicating the rest of the Altia household, Loria was the sole exception left untouched. Their orders were clear. The Altia family was to be purged under the Red Moon's command. For now, Rina reminded Deus that their top priority was ensuring that their master remained unaware of anything related to Avalon or the bloodshed surrounding it. Unaware of the silent storm brewing behind the scenes, Alan continued to puzzle over his own social disaster. Why did everyone seem to avoid him like the plague? Did he unknowingly emit some kind of magical aura that repelled people? His musings were interrupted when the same red-haired woman from earlier approached him once again. Her graceful stride and confident poise immediately caught his attention, and for a fleeting moment, Alan felt an odd spark of hope. Maybe this time, someone was genuinely trying to talk to him. But as she drew nearer, his optimism faded. He recognized her face, one he'd only ever seen in the Psychedelia game. His mind raced. No ordinary person would approach me first unless they're trouble. He greeted her politely. "Lady Zenonia, I presume?" The woman raised an eyebrow, slightly amused. "Oh, you know my name?" Alan nodded lightly. It would be hard not to. In the Asteria Kingdom, there are 3 major shadow families: Altia of the north, Belasio of the east, and Zenonia of the west. You're quite well known. The lady smiled, clearly entertained. "Well, I suppose fame has its advantages." She introduced herself as Kalia Zenonia, the eldest daughter of Count Zenonia, and carried herself with a seductive elegance that seemed both charming and dangerous. Alan explained that while his own family often dealt in chaotic, reckless affairs, the Zenonias were far more strategic, operating like a refined underground syndicate that moved pieces across the kingdom without anyone realizing. Just the thought made him uneasy. "You're certainly impressive, Lady Kalia," he said with a polite bow, "but I fear I'm not the best company tonight." In truth, Alan was desperate to stay far away from anyone connected to the shadow world. The woman radiated trouble, and he wasn't about to let her drag him into it. He intended to excuse himself, but before he could, Kalia stopped him with a teasing smile. "Oh, so the rumors were right after all," she said. "You really are quite interesting, Lord Palatio." Alan blinked, unsure how to take that. "Rumors?" She leaned closer. "Let's just say I look forward to our next conversation." With that, she gracefully turned and walked away, leaving Alan completely bewildered. Her words sounded like some kind of hidden message, but he couldn't decipher it. He sighed, deciding not to overthink it. Meanwhile, Rhina and Deus, who had been watching from an upper balcony, exchanged approving nods. So far, their mission was going exactly as planned. Their master remained blissfully ignorant of the deeper conspiracies around him. But just as they began to relax, Deus suddenly stiffened. Peering out the window toward the garden below, he spotted a shadowy figure tailing Alan. "Someone's following him," he muttered. Without hesitation, the two agents disappeared from their vantage points, vanishing into the night to intercept the intruder. The next day, Alan and Evan found themselves trekking through a dense forest. The air was thick and humid, the sunlight struggling to pierce the canopy above. "Are you sure this is the place?" Evan asked skeptically. "It's bright as noon, yet this canyon feels like midnight." Alan, however, was too exhilarated to care. His eyes gleamed as he examined the surrounding cliffs. Yes, this is it, the Canyon of Whispers. Finally, he could barely contain his excitement. This was the real reason he had attended the Southern Ball, to find the hidden labyrinth of whispers buried beneath the canyon. According to his knowledge from the game, this labyrinth contained 8 puzzle chambers, each one guarding an ancient artifact of immense power. "If this one turns out empty, like the last few," Alan joked, "I might actually cry." As they entered, faint runes glowed on the stone walls, confirming that he was in the right place. Alan smiled in awe. "It's even more breathtaking in reality." Evan raised a brow. "Reality? You talk as if you've been here before." Alan froze for a second, realizing his slip-up. No, I just meant I read about it somewhere." Evan squinted suspiciously, but decided to drop it. Together, they moved deeper into the labyrinth, where ancient mechanisms began to stir. From the shadows, massive stone hands rose from the ground, their movements slow but powerful enough to crush a man in one blow. "Let me guess," Evan sighed. "Get the puzzle wrong, and those things smash us flat?" "Pretty much," Alan replied casually, already examining the inscriptions on the walls. His calm demeanor baffled Evan, who couldn't understand how he remained so composed while death loomed inches away. They had been traveling together for nearly 4 years, yet Evan still couldn't figure him out. Alan would rescue orphans, pay off strangers' debts, free slaves, and carry out the most random tasks without hesitation. He was eccentric, unpredictable, and somehow, everything he did always led to a good outcome. They finally made it inside, though the gruesome sights from earlier still lingered in the protagonist's mind, twisting his stomach with unease. But as they entered a grand chamber glittering with gold and jewels, his gaze immediately locked onto a statue shaped like a hand, its fingers weighed down by several ornate rings. Among them, one stood out, a simple black ring. Pointing to it, he declared that this was their true target and urged Evan to grab it quickly so they could leave before anything went wrong. Evan, who was already busy shoving handfuls of coins and gems into his pouch, frowned in confusion, saying that the dull ring didn't even look valuable. The protagonist replied that taking anything else would invite trouble, though deep down he knew the real reason. He had finally found the Ring of Oath, Restraint, one of the most powerful artifacts from his game knowledge. Feeling proud of himself for getting it so easily, he began to think luck was finally on his side, but Evan's instincts flared. He stiffened, his eyes darting toward the canyon entrance. The piles of rock they had passed earlier were shifting, not rocks at all, but golems slowly rising to life. Evan drew his weapon, his expression tense. He didn't recognize these creatures, which only made things worse, and thought that if he could just get the young master out alive, he wouldn't mind sacrificing himself. Before he could act, the protagonist stepped forward, calm and resolute, telling Evan to stand down because he would handle this. Evan tried to protest, warning that his own second-tier magic wouldn't even scratch these things. But the protagonist ignored him, raising his hand and invoking the Oath of Restraint. The black ring pulsed, and suddenly, time froze. A vast, otherworldly void enveloped him, and a titanic face emerged from the darkness, its voice echoing in his mind. I am the fragment of Nyakula's great will. Speak, mortal. What 2 restraints shall you impose upon yourself? Even knowing this from the game, experiencing it firsthand sent chills down his spine. The Oath of Restraint was an absorption-type relic, granting immense power in exchange for self-imposed limitations. Gathering his composure, he made the first declaration, saying, I will perform the hand signs of Babylonia every time I cast magic. The voice rumbled in approval, asking what he sought in return. I wish to bend the laws of the world, just a little more, he replied. The entity granted his wish, and the void shimmered with energy. For my second restraint, he continued, I will always chant the words of Babylonia when using magic. The voice demanded to know his desire behind this vow. I want the strength to defy the world's laws even further, he answered. For a moment, silence filled the void, and the colossal face seemed almost intrigued. Then, with a thunderous hum, it accepted. Your restraints are acknowledged, you, who remember the gestures and words of the forgotten god. I will watch over you. The ring dissolved into his skin, and the darkness faded, time lurching forward as the golem's attack resumed mid-motion. Evan shouted a warning, but the protagonist simply smiled, beginning to weave his hand signs and chants. Refraction, repulsion, direction, each word and gesture amplifying the energy at his fingertips. Sparks of blue lightning coalesced into a brilliant orb. He released it with a flourish. The explosion of light and sound so grand, it reminded Evan of legends, like a divine judgment. The blast annihilated every golem in sight, leaving behind only ash and scorched stone. Evan let out a long breath, as he muttered that in all his 15 years as a mercenary, he had never witnessed anything even close to what just happened. He turned to the protagonist with wide eyes, asking if that was truly second-tier magic. The young master nodded without hesitation, though inwardly he was just as baffled by the outcome. Nothing about that spell had gone the way it did in the game. In Psychedelia's turn-based combat system, spells could be strengthened turn by turn through hand signs and incantations. This time, however, he had stacked 4 different incantations and hand gestures together, the equivalent of 5 turns in the game, and the result was pure devastation. Essentially, he had cast what was meant to be a large-scale lightning spell. Yet because of the Oath of Restraint, he was now required to use both chants and hand signs every time he performed magic, causing his spells to amplify repeatedly on their own. Even so, he couldn't help but think that his so-called second-tier magic had gone completely overboard, far surpassing any reasonable expectation. The power he released wasn't just enhanced, it was monstrous. Meanwhile, Evan was simply relieved to still be breathing. Slumping back, he gave a shaky laugh, saying that watching the battle had drained him more than actually fighting would have. He glanced around at the wrecked canyon and grumbled, asking who in the world would design such an unpleasant place. After thinking for a moment, the protagonist realized something. In the game, this dungeon wasn't called the Maze of Whispers. It had a different name, the Maze of Paladin. He recalled seeing the layout and strategy guide once on a fan site. Casually, he told Evan that it must have been built by someone named Paladin, but his companion was far too exhausted to make sense of that information. Despite the chaos, the two shared a brief moment of calm. The protagonist tugged Evan to his feet, insisting they head home since he had something important to test out once they returned. Evan blinked in confusion, wondering why his usually laid-back master suddenly seemed so fired up. On the way, the young master explained his theory. Every time he matched a spell's elemental attribute with the corresponding hand sign, its potency increased. And if he chose the right incantation, it enhanced the spell's properties even further. That was how Psychedelia's magic system worked. But unlike the game, where the numbers simply went up while the visual effect stayed the same, here, the magic itself transformed with each enhancement. That made him wonder if this was unique to him. Could other mages do the same? Or was it a result of his exceptional mana control? He decided he'd need to experiment further once his mana recovered. For now, though, he was just grateful that things hadn't gone horribly wrong. As they mounted their horses and began their journey back, a faint silhouette emerged from the shadows. Run, who had been quietly tailing the protagonist from a distance. Once the two men were gone, she approached the canyon ruins, her eyes scanning the ancient walls. Strange glyphs shimmered faintly under the dust. To her surprise, she could actually read them. They were the runes of the Alaneth Empire, chronicling the age of the forgotten outer gods. Her gaze fell on a smaller inscription tucked away in a corner, one that read, "For my friend who shall be left behind from the coward Palin." Reen's expression softened. A faint smile crossed her lips as she deciphered the rest. A tale of the one who repelled the dark hordes and triumphed over the monstrous Al-Akulaka, devourer of hearts. That hero was none other than Emperor Palion the Great. She knew this story well. It was all recorded in the ancient library she inherited at birth. Remembering that the protagonist had mentioned Palion's name earlier, she immediately jumped to the wrong conclusion. In her mind, the Maze of Paladon could only mean that her mysterious master was somehow connected to Emperor Palayon himself. The fact that even the Bloody Queen Utia served under him only solidified her belief. No ordinary man could command such a figure. Her cheeks flushed red as she realized she might have underestimated him. Maybe Utia had been right all along. The phrase, "Great Moon," which he used while casting magic, didn't appear anywhere in her ancient texts, convincing her even further that he was someone extraordinary, perhaps even a reincarnated deity. Feeling a mix of awe and embarrassment for ever doubting him, she bit her lip and smiled shyly to herself. Unknowingly, the protagonist had just gained another admirer, one with dangerously obsessive tendencies. Moments later, Deus arrived, his boots crunching against the scorched ground. Reena immediately asked if he'd learned anything from the spy tailing their master. Deus shook his head grimly, saying the fool was already dead before he got there, his neck twisted midair by some unseen force. Rhina's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll report it to Udia," she said firmly. Deus nodded in agreement, and together they vanished into the canyon's shadows. Meanwhile, in the serene yet ominous halls of Zenonia County, Lady Kalia sat by the window, delicately sipping her tea as her thoughts drifted toward the mysterious young man everyone had been whispering about. His cold, detached demeanor and those abyssal eyes that seemed to pierce through one's soul matched the rumors perfectly. She frowned slightly, replaying his words in her mind. He had called her famous. That alone unsettled her. The Zenonia family was powerful and respected, yes, but she herself rarely appeared in public or engaged in noble society. For him to use that particular word felt strange, intentional even. What truly gnawed at her, however, was the possibility that he knew something, because behind the polished image of the Count's daughter lay the truth. Kalia was the real power behind the Zenonia household. Her father, the so-called Count, was nothing more than a puppet under her control, bound by the threads of black magic she had secretly mastered. The notion that this young man might have seen through her facade sent a chill down her spine. No one, not even her closest attendants, knew that the Count's every word and gesture were hers to command. Her mind returned to their last encounter. His calm remark about too many eyes watching them. Kalia bit her lip. Could he have been referring to the spy she had assigned to monitor him? The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that he had uncovered her scheme. Just then, the door burst open, and one of her servants rushed in, pale-faced. "My lady, there's been an incident," he said breathlessly. Kalia set down her cup, her gaze sharpening. "What happened?" "It would be best if you saw it yourself," the servant replied nervously. Suppressing a sigh, she rose and made her way to her private chambers. The moment she entered, her eyes widened. Lying motionless on the floor was the man she had sent to tail the young master, dead. The servant hurried to explain. "The seal on his body didn't react, my lady. That means he didn't reveal any information before dying." Kalia's expression darkened, her mind racing. Then, whoever did this brought the body here on purpose. The implication hit her like a wave. Someone had not only killed her operative, but had deliberately placed him in her room. A silent message. Her hands clenched at her sides as she muttered, "How did he find out? How could he possibly know I sent this man?" And just like that, another layer of misunderstanding settled into place, her thoughts spiraling with suspicion and fear. The truth remained simple. Our poor Alan had no idea what kind of chaos he'd unintentionally stirred this time. Within the grand halls of the Altea ducal estate, silence lingered like a heavy fog. Loria walked down the dimly lit corridors, her steps slow, her expression weary. The weight of regret pressed down on her shoulders as she recalled the events that had brought her to this point. She had known from the very beginning that he was not a man to trifle with, the one they called the distinguished one of the underworld. a man whose icy eyes reminded her of her father's, sharp, merciless, and impossible to read. Once, she had hoped he would be her final lifeline, but she should have known better. Someone like him would never agree to a deal that offered him no benefit. Her wealth, influence, and supporters had all been stolen away by her cunning siblings, leaving her stripped of everything. For a time, she had survived only by her father's fading affection, yet now, even that seemed uncertain. As she moved deeper into the estate, her thoughts grew bleak. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered under her breath, her voice trembling. But her moment of solitude was shattered when a group of maids came rushing toward her, their faces pale and their voices quivering in panic. "Lady Loria!" they cried out. "Something terrible has happened." Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" she asked, though dread had already begun to sink in. The maids exchanged fearful glances before one finally spoke. "Lady Pyrene and Lord Keeg, they've taken their own lives." Loria's breath caught in her throat. Her body went still as disbelief washed over her. They took their own lives? The very people who had schemed and clawed their way to power would rather die than face her. It made no sense. Her mind spun as she demanded, "Where are Tamalian and Marianne?" Moments later, she was led to a chilling sight. Tamalian and Marianne, both lying lifeless on the floor, their blades buried deep into each other's chests. Loria's knees nearly gave out as horror gripped her. None of this added up. Why would they do this? What kind of nightmare had fallen upon her family? Outside the Altia mansion, a figure slipped away unnoticed. It was Radon. A faint smirk curved his lips as he muttered under his breath, "Successfully eliminated." Meanwhile, within the estate, Loria's mind reeled back to Alan's earlier words, his cryptic assurance that good things would happen soon. A shiver ran through her. So this is what he meant. The realization struck her like a blade. He had orchestrated everything. The hidden hand that had been biding its time within the shadows of the Count's household had finally revealed its claws. In a single night, all her rivals were gone, and she, Loria Altia, stood as the sole heir of the ducal family. Her heart pounded as fear and awe clashed within her. What kind of monster have I made a pact with? She thought, trembling. Yet deep down, she knew retreat was no longer an option. Those who had betrayed him had all met gruesome ends. There were countless examples to remind her of that. Steeling herself, she took a slow, steady breath and whispered, "I chose this path. I must see it through." A faint fire of determination flickered behind her eyes. 2 months later, a lavish parcel arrived from the Altia estate, addressed to Alan. When Evan saw it, his eyes widened in astonishment. Inside was a bottle of Sir Nance's wine, a legendary vintage valued in the thousands of gold coins. This is the kind of wine nobles only talk about," he said, stunned. Alan examined the accompanying letter and froze when he saw the signature. It wasn't from Duke Altea himself, but from Loria Altia. He blinked, puzzled. "Why would she send this to me?" he murmured, a faint pang of guilt tightening his chest. He remembered how powerless he had been when she needed help the most. Turning to the servant, he asked quietly, "Are you certain this was meant for me?" The servant nodded. "The Duke herself prepared it, my lord, and ordered it to be delivered personally." Those words made Alan pause. "The Duke herself," he repeated softly, the realization dawning. Loria Altia has become the Duke. Within her new office, Loria leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms with a sigh of relief. 2 months already, she murmured, after her father's death and illness. She had been formally appointed as the new head of House Altea. She glanced around the office, the very room she once wasn't even allowed to enter. Her gaze dimmed as memories surfaced. Her siblings' sudden deaths had caused a storm across the empire, but suspicion never fell on her. She had been at a ball at the time, her perfect alibi. Back then, her secret organization had been crushed, leaving her powerless. Yet even then, he had already accounted for everything. His rejection of her plea had seemed cold, but in truth, he had meticulously erased all her enemies from the board. She clasped her hands together, whispering, "Just how far ahead did you plan, Alan?" Even though she had not informed him of her father's passing, intending not to burden him, he had still moved pieces in her favor. It was clear his interest in Altea wasn't out of sentiment. He needed her house for a reason, a role in whatever grand design he was weaving. Though she had since consolidated the remaining organizations under her control, she knew she was still far from matching the vast power hidden behind his calm demeanor. That could only mean one thing. He wanted something more from her, Palacio, the famed figure of the underworld, the man who had built an empire from the shadows through intellect and manipulation alone. He was now watching. Loria smiled faintly, her eyes glinting with resolve. If it's the Altean name he needs, then so be it. I'll play my part, she said quietly. For now, she would wait, certain that the distinguished one would reach out again soon, and hope with Red Chicks that he would like her gift of gratitude. At the Palatio's place, Alan's mind distant as Loria's servant bowed respectfully before him, murmuring that he would take his leave. Alan gave a brief nod, though his gaze lingered, clouded with disbelief. The revelation that Loria Altea, once a desperate woman cornered by death, now bore the title of Duke, felt surreal to him. It didn't sit right, not because she didn't deserve it, but because the transformation seemed too abrupt, too deliberate. Evan, standing nearby, noticed the troubled look on his master's face. His brow furrowed slightly, wondering what had him so lost in thought this time. Time moved forward, months slipping quietly by, and the narration marked this moment as 5 years before the original story began. In a bright morning filled with scent of polished wood and parchment, Evan entered the room in a hurry, his voice full of energy as he called out, "Young Master Alan," before stopping short. Realizing his mistake, he quickly corrected himself. "Count Alan." Alan glanced up from his desk, his expression calm. "The succession ceremony hasn't taken place yet," he replied mildly, "but since it's already been a year, I suppose it's fine." His tone was steady, though his sigh afterward betrayed a trace of resignation. Becoming Count had never been part of his plan, yet now that it had fallen upon him, he had learned to adapt, and perhaps to use that title to his own advantage. Evan approached with a letter in hand, his expression turning serious. "This just arrived from Lady Utia," he said. Alan hummed thoughtfully as he took the envelope, asking, "Still nothing on the assassins who killed Leo?" Evan shook his head. "No leads yet. The Information Guild is still digging, but nothing concrete has surfaced. We'll need to give them more time." Alan settled into one of the armchairs, his fingers brushing absently over the wax seal of the letter. "I see," he murmured, his eyes distant. Evan hesitated, then asked, "So what's next, my lord? Revenge isn't what you're after anymore, is it?" Silence filled the grand library. Alan leaned back, eyes narrowing in contemplation. He had begun to notice subtle differences from the world he remembered, the deviations from the game's original timeline, the unexpected turns. He realized these were the butterfly effects of his own actions, small ripples that had grown into waves. He exhaled softly. "Whatever comes next, I'll be ready," he said, almost to himself. Evan chuckled under his breath. "You suddenly sound like a real count." Alan smirked faintly. "Don't start," he replied, brushing the remark aside, but his curiosity soon shifted toward the letter. "Let's see what Udia has written this time." Breaking the seal, he unfolded the parchment and began to read. Udia's familiar handwriting carried warmth and a touch of playfulness. She asked how he had been, assuring him that everything on their end was peaceful. She wrote about their daily lives, saying Deus's puppet shows had become professional-level performances. Seorang was still as energetic as ever, always eager to play and learn. Ran spent her quiet days reading and crafting, and Radan, surprisingly, had taken up gardening. A gentle smile spread across Alan's face. The steady rhythm of their letters had become something precious to him, a small comfort that brightened the monotony of noble life. Though he had never met them face to face, knowing that they were growing happily filled him with a deep and genuine sense of warmth. That smile lingered until a sudden thought struck him, his eyes widening slightly. "They must be nearly grown by now," he murmured. Evan, who had been watching him, nodded. "Yes, they're almost ready to enter society." Alan leaned back, silent for a moment, realizing that the 5 children he had once rescued were no longer the small, fragile souls he remembered. "It's time," he said quietly. "Time to let them go." Evan looked surprised. "But you placed them there for their own protection, because they were wounded." Alan's tone remained calm but firm. "There's no need for that anymore. They're strong enough now. I made sure they wouldn't awaken as deadly sins. They've outgrown their need for me." Evan gave a slow nod, conceding, "You're right. They're healthy, capable. It's time to move forward." Alan's thoughts wandered briefly to the game's original storyline, recalling the brief summaries of each boss's background. Utia with the talent of faith, Deus, the gifted swordsman, Rina, the scholar, Seolrang, the fighter, and Radan, the apostle. If each of them followed the right path, it would surely flourish. A small spark of pride warmed his chest as he murmured, "Perfect. Everything's in place." He decided then that he would prepare parting gifts for each of them, tokens to guide them into their new lives. After all, he had always meant to give them something when the time came, and now it seemed that moment had arrived. As evening descended, casting long shadows across the study, Evan stretched and sighed with relief. "I'll step out for a bit, my lord. I'll be back soon." Alan waved him off with a faint smile. "Go on," he said, his gaze lingering on the letters spread before him. He allowed himself a small, wistful grin. Meanwhile, far away, Utia carefully unfolded Alan's latest letter. She called, "Our orders have arrived." This time, however, the messages weren't shared. Each of them had received one personally. Seolrang bounced excitedly on her feet, barely able to contain herself, while Deo simply stared at the seal on his envelope, deep in thought. Rina, her cheeks tinged pink, traced the wax mark with admiration, each child feeling, in their own quiet way,
Utia then suggested everyone that they should go over the previous letter as well, since the newly arrived instructions seemed to require everyone's full attention. Seolrang, speaking in her usual adorable tone, commented that only Utia had managed to read the earlier messages, if it's fine for them. Utia explained that since Alan had now given each one of them a personal order, it meant he had decided the time had come for them to read their individual letters themselves. The letter written by Alan made Seolrang and the other Sins perk up like curious kittens. Seolrang clumsily repeated the first line. Alan had written, "How have you been these days? It seems you've gathered many talented companions. If you ever need anything, let me know." Rina remarked that it sounded like ordinary small talk, but Utia smiled faintly. She knew Alan had deliberately kept the opening simple. After the initial greeting letter, this was the first real directive he had issued. He had identified their elimination targets, assigned missions, and instructed them to report afterward. It was also during this time that he entrusted Blue Moon to her. All the Sins could clearly see now that they had been handpicked by him, and each of them felt excited at the thought of meeting him someday. Deus nodded thoughtfully. It made sense. This prevented needless information leaks. He remembered his own first mission and smirked, recalling how rigidly Alan had told him to understand the instructions thoroughly and carry them out without fail. Deus then wondered aloud whether it would be better to meet Alan personally or contact him through magical communication. Radan agreed that if secrecy was the issue, using letters did seem unusual. Utia's expression hardened. She reminded them that their duty was to obey Alan's orders. Nothing more, nothing less. She tightened her grip on the letter and Deus sighed, helpless before her unwavering determination. Finally, Deus suggested that they read their directives properly. After reviewing his mission, Deus announced that Alan had ordered him to head to Caliban, the land of knights. Seolrang scoffed, complaining that it was a sandy wasteland she disliked. Raiden shared his own destination, Raksa, the city of entertainment. Rina said she had been instructed to go to Larthania, the maze city. Lastly, Utia spoke gracefully. She had been assigned to the Holy Kingdom of Risaro. Everything they had to do was clearly recorded in their letters. Deus admitted he didn't understand the reasoning behind it, but Alan had ordered him to become a knight. Seolrang added that Alan had reassured her that their patronage would continue regardless. Rina mentioned that he had also revealed the locations of their gifts. Radan calmly stated that everything would become clear once they reached their destinations. Utia gathered everyone and repeated final rule. They must never speak the name Blue Moon. The group agreed and prepared for departure. The next morning, all members assembled and left to fulfill Alan's orders. 3 months later, inside Duke Alan's office, he sighed. As expected, there had been no significant advancement in magical research. He continued studying advanced magical texts to enhance his abilities, muttering that he would eventually need to conduct experiments himself. Suddenly, he glanced at his knight and asked what he was doing. Something crossed his mind, and he questioned Evan about the investigation into Leo's assassination. Evan replied that the Information Guild still had no findings. Alan blinked in mild surprise and asked if there was any other report. Quietly, he murmured that the butterfly effect caused by saving the 5 deadly sins had already spiraled out of control. Even Loris, who didn't appear in the original storyline at all, had somehow become the Duke of Altia family. The thought unsettled him. She was expanding her influence in the underworld at a terrifying pace. Alan let out a weary laugh and told Evan to halt the investigation into the Ascension. It was tedious work, and he already had too many burdens to manage. Evan looked stunned. "Are you certain, Master?" Alan explained that the entire situation was clearly the result of his own ignorance. In a place like this, almost nothing escaped the Information Guild. Even he felt uneasy about poking into matters he wasn't meant to uncover. If some unexpected variable led directly to someone's death, the investigation would be meaningless. And besides, organizations like that would never target him unless he approached them first. Thus, there was no reason to pursue the investigation into Leo's death. Evan nodded and agreed to inform the guild immediately. Then he remembered something else. "Oh, there is more news," he said. "Deus has recently been appointed as a knight in Caliburn." Alan looked up in genuine surprise. "Really? Good for him." Another 3 months passed. Evan entered the office carrying snacks. Count, there's another update, he said. Deus has established an entire Knight Order. Alan straightened immediately. A Knight Order? Then he must have reached at least sword expert level. Has he already become a sword master? Evan replied that Deus had indeed reached the level of a sword expert. Alan fell silent, impressed. It hadn't been long since Deus had first been appointed. Students across the continent were already talking about it, saying that within 10 years the world would see the rise of the 5th Master Knight. Alan raised an eyebrow. Deus, the future Master Knight? The one they're calling the Sword of Caliburn? Evan chuckled. Yes, his talent is extraordinary. Caliburn is in an uproar because of him. He keeps gaining recognition and followers through his swordsmanship. Alan quietly admired Deus's remarkable growth. 6 months later, almost a full year had passed since the 5 deadly sins left the orphanage, and Alan had gradually adjusted to the duties of a count. Just then, Evan hurried into the office with urgent news. Count, something very recent just came in. Alan lifted his eyes from the documents. What is it? Evan drew in a short breath. Deus has officially become the Sword of Caliburn. Alan froze. That title meant only one thing. Deus had risen to the rank of the 5th Master Knight. Regaining his composure, Alan said calmly, only a sword master can become Master Knight. In this world, the Sword Master of Psychedelia is a superman who has gone beyond the Aura Blade. With that, they unlock a unique ability called Deviation. He looked sharply at Evan. Are you saying Deus has already become a sword master? Evan quickly clarified. Not yet, my lord. He is close to reaching that level. He hasn't formed his deviation, but the kingdom granted him the title anyway. He defeated the 4th sword in a duel, and with one of Caliburn's master knights killed by northern barbarians, the nation needed a replacement. Ellen thought about this. The northern tribes in Caliburn had been at war for more than a decade. Evan continued. Normally, it takes around 5 years just to sense mana and learn to control it, and creating a deviation usually takes decades. The first sword, Reinhardt, became the youngest Master Knight in history at age 32. He had trained with a sword since age 5 and was unmatched in talent. Even then, it took him more than 20 years to achieve that rank. But now, a boy who once knew nothing about swords was standing on the brink of becoming a Master Knight. Alan's eyes widened. If the only thing he lacks is a deviation, doesn't that already place him above Reinhardt? He might become a sword master soon. A faint smile appeared on his lips. Maybe I will be able to benefit from him sooner than expected. Alan looked down at the letter in his hand and sighed. Perhaps there is nothing left for me to do now. Alan held the letter gently and explained that the only person who ever wrote to him was Yudia. Even after arriving in the Holy Kingdom of Riza, she sent letters without fail, each one containing updates about the 5 deadly sins she grew up with. It seemed they all remained in contact. He sighed softly. They haven't even seen my face. Yet they could have at least thanked me for the gifts. He paused, then lightly slapped his cheeks. No, I should be grateful they didn't destroy the entire kingdom after awakening as the 5 deadly sins. A tired smile tugged at his lips. As long as they are living well, I'm happy. Scene then shifts to Caliburn, the central district of Kurtham. Caliburn's central district, home to powerful nobles, held the grand mansion of the famous Sorskalf Knight Order. Inside the vast training grounds, countless knights practiced their sword techniques. At the top of a hill stood Deus, wearing his full knight uniform. He looked imposing, serene, and strikingly handsome. His title echoed throughout Caliban. Deus Macallion, captain of the Solar Eclipse Knight Order, youngest master knight in history. A cheerful girl waved up at him. Deus smiled softly in return. He appeared far older and more composed compared to his childhood. Memories rose in his mind, still embarrassing even after a whole year. He remembered the day he lost everything to the Black Corruption, the day his sister was swallowed by darkness. Consumed by fury, he had tried to protect her, but his hatred dragged him further into ruin until he nearly became a prisoner himself. He had fallen completely. The Great Moon. Saving him wasn't enough reason to swear loyalty, but he had pledged himself out of desperation, believing it was the only path left. He recalled Yudia's voice and the promise he made, to take revenge with his own hands. Serving under Blue Moon threw him into countless dangerous missions. He never complained, never hesitated. Each mission became a stepping stone toward confronting the black forces that destroyed his life. After years of service, he finally received his first personal order from Ellen. When he opened that final letter, he had been confused. The directive was unlike any mission Blue Moon had ever assigned. It led him to a small inn in southern Caliban, where he was instructed to retrieve a gift. Gifts meant nothing to someone who had lost everything. His heart felt empty as he followed the directions. But when he reached the inn's room, Deus instantly understood what his master had given him. The gift was his sister, alive, safe, waiting for him. His hands trembled violently as he read the last line of the letter. The gift from the Great Moon is your family, the one you believed lost forever. Deus fell to his knees. Tears streamed uncontrollably as he rushed forward and embraced her with shaking arms. His sister stared at him in disbelief, eyes red and trembling. To Deus, she was more precious than his own life. His arms trembling as if the weight of years had suddenly crashed onto him. His voice cracked when he tried to speak, unable to reconcile the belief that she had died with the reality of her warm presence. Through blurry eyes, he searched her face and finally whispered the question that had haunted him since the day she vanished. A few shaky breaths later, they sat side by side with steaming cups of tea. Once her sobs faded and her hands steadied, Siley began to recount everything. After the creatures dragged her away, she said she had spent what felt like an eternity in suffocating darkness. She remembered the iron bars of a pitch-black cage, the dread of waiting for the moment she would be hauled out and slaughtered. When her execution day came, a figure of overwhelming strength appeared. That person seized her hand and pulled her toward the light, her first miracle. Years later, when she was about to be sold to a slave merchant, another powerful individual intervened. A blade cleaved through her would-be captors, rescuing her once again. The man who saved her was Evan. Back in the present, Siley explained that after those ordeals, had received rare medicine from a mysterious benefactor. Holding Alan's letter between her fingers, she repeated the sponsor's words with unwavering certainty. The letter, signed by Alan Palatio himself, stated that all the support, medicine, and aid had been prepared specifically for her, and that delivery must always be done in person. It was then that Dews realized the truth. The Great Moon, Alan Palladio, had been acting on his sister's behalf all this time. She was precious to him, and she spoke with glowing pride about the sponsor who had given her more help than she could ever repay. Alan had chosen to remain hidden, using Evan as his hands and eyes. Dews, however, sat frozen. Shock widened his eyes as he whispered that the Great Moon had been shielding her under his own name. But how? How did the Great Moon even know about their family? Dews had never breathed a word about them to anyone. Only Utia had noticed the black lamp that once targeted him. His grip tightened on his shoulders as the question gnawed at him. How did the Great Moon know everything? As Dews wrestled with the truth, memories of Utia began to reassemble themselves in his mind. Her unease whenever she mentioned the Great Moon, her trembling voice, her constant warning that a sword could never act without its master. All the pieces snapped together at last. He felt darkness curling through his thoughts. The foolish one had been him, and yet there was still a faint, fragile hope. He remembered the old words. The Great Moon already knew everything, and had left clues for the child forced to survive alone. His body shook as the revelation finally struck him. Seeing his pale face, Siley tugged his sleeve and asked what was wrong. Within himself, Dews knew the truth. Great Moon's sword himself had dared to act independently, yet the Great Moon had chosen mercy over punishment. Dews whispered that he had wasted his years drowning in hatred for the Black Sheep, never seeing the unseen hands behind his suffering. He looked at Siley. Her smile now carried the light of someone who had clawed her way out of a nightmare. To him, her survival was a gift he could never repay. Utia's old words echoed again, how she followed a man more terrifying than any monster, the Great Moon. She had not been a fanatic. She had chosen to walk that path with her own will, becoming a knight through personal conviction. Only now did Dews finally understand why she prayed to Alan as though he were divine. His eyes hardened with resolve. He announced that he would rise to the summit of Caliburn, claim the title of Master Knight, and form his own knight order, an elite legion loyal to the Great Moon alone. Sometime later, Dews stood on a balcony. A tall knight approached and informed him that everything was prepared. Dews stepped forward and gazed down at the assembled order. He proclaimed that this expedition would become the foundation of the Solar Eclipse Knights. Hardship meant nothing to him now. Gripping his fearsome, spellbinding sword, he declared that he awaited the day he could repay the Great Moon in a way worthy of him. Dark determination burned in his eyes. His faith in the prodigy of their era was absolute. He vowed to prove himself beneath the moon's radiance. The Solar Eclipse Knights marched out, beginning their expedition against the barbarians. At the Palatio estate, Alan rested outside in the open air, enjoying an unusual stillness. The place felt calmer now, perhaps because all his children had grown into capable fighters who no longer needed constant supervision. With a soft sigh, he flipped through his notebook, murmuring that everyone had drifted off on their own paths, and for the moment, he didn't want to dig for more information. His life already felt chaotic enough. He rubbed his temples and muttered that he should stop scribbling in cursive, promising himself to write more neatly next time. Freshly returned from the labyrinth, he redirected his attention to the strange phrases he had discovered there. A quiet chuckle escaped him. His newest reports were finally finished. Leaning back, he reviewed the concepts he had been examining: reinforcement of magical imprints and the behavior of refraction within spells. Refraction, he noted, amplified the flaws within a finished spell, causing its violent energy to swell outward. Repulsion, meanwhile, warped the spell's structure and affected the trajectory of a launched projectile. Even now, the complexities fascinated him. With the law of the universe at his fingertips, a power that let him manipulate the fundamental rules of reality, Alan could push magic beyond its expected limits. From his studies, he concluded that blue light strengthened magic aligned in parallel patterns, such as electricity. He theorized that diffraction lines created piercing properties, generating critical damage upon impact. When he had struck the golem earlier, the enormous creature had been annihilated in an instant, reduced to nothing. But every rule mattered. In his spells, even a single misplaced phrase invited disaster. Worse still, his current mana reserves allowed him to cast only one spell of that magnitude each day. A heavy fatigue weighed on his shoulders. It had taken countless hours to understand even this much. He sobered as he considered the restrictions of this world. The hand signs and incantations of ancient Babylonia had been lost to history. No records survived. With nothing to reference, he had been left to reconstruct them through sheer experimentation. Strangely, he had grown fond of the challenge, despite learning magic only to protect himself. Placing his fingers together, Alan prepared the spell he had been perfecting for 2 months. A faint purple spark formed before him. He explained aloud that removing the focal point of the mana phrase would produce the instability needed to generate lightning. A small sphere of violet electricity materialized. He named it a simple fluctuation spell, weak, limited, incomplete. Yet the moment he spoke the final chant, a ripple of thunder burst from the sphere, locking the structure in place. He continued, voice steady, compression. The magic tightened. The spell phrases disassembled and wove themselves back together. At the final moment, he completed the last hand sign, activating the spell's true purpose. A violent thunder cannon tore upward, exploding into the sky. A tidal wave of blue lightning roared across the field, shaking the earth beneath him. Alan stood frozen, stunned by the overwhelming force he had unleashed. The order of the phrases had been everything. When he had tried using breakdown at the start, the spell had collapsed instantly. Then, a voice rang out behind him. Impossible. Alan spun around. His expression hardened in shock when he saw who stood there. Kalia, the red-haired villainess who had always attempted to bend him into her puppet, had arrived with her butler. Both stared at the fading lightning, speechless. The butler muttered, eyes wide. Origin magic. Using origin magic, he whispered, meant that Alan stood at the level of a 7th circle mage. Alan stiffened, bewildered. Origin circle? He had never once heard his abilities described that way. As he watched the two of them gawking at him, their faces stretched in exaggerated astonishment, Alan felt his expression twist. He wondered how they could look so utterly ridiculous at a moment like this. After everything that had happened, the scene shifted to the interior of the Palatio mansion. Kalia sat stiffly on an ornate sofa, her posture unusually tense. Her butler, Viankel, sat beside her, but even he, who normally carried an arrogant, unshakable demeanor, looked pale and shaken. Kalia had originally come here with 2 clear objectives in mind. First, to confirm whether the Palladio heir, Alan, truly possessed a hidden trump card capable of dealing devastating damage to the Zenonia family, and second, to investigate the mysterious organization rumored to be supporting him, the same organization that supposedly allowed him to seize absolute control over the Palladio household. However, the moment they witnessed Alan's power, both of them realized they had learned something far beyond what they expected. What they saw had been terrifying. So terrifying that even Viankel, a 5th circle mage expelled from the Magic Tower for his inhuman research methods, trembled. Viankel was infamous for being capable of wiping out an entire battalion of soldiers with a single spell, yet he had never shown fear before today. Kalia had been sponsored by him for years and knew his personality well. No matter the opponent, Viankel's arrogance never wavered. But now his hands were shaking, and the expression on his face showed a fear she had never seen in him before. Kalia tried to steady her breathing. She wasn't even sure if what they had witnessed earlier was origin magic. A faint sound came from the hallway. Both she and her butler immediately turned their heads. The tension in the air tightened as Alan Palatian stepped calmly into the room. His eyes went straight to Kalia, sharp and assessing. Without any warmth, he asked about her intention in visiting the Palatio County. Only after speaking did he sit down on the sofa directly across from her, maintaining an air of complete control. Kalia quickly apologized for the sudden and unannounced visit. She attempted to explain that she had been wanting to meet him for a long time, but Alan cut her off before she could finish. He told her that it wasn't entirely her fault, but anyone who had witnessed what she had seen might easily misunderstand. He clarified with a cold edge that what she and her butler had seen earlier was not origin magic. His eyes sharpened even further as he stated that if they intended to criticize or misunderstand his abilities, he wished to clarify the truth immediately. He explained that he was merely a 2nd circle mage, nothing more. Alan also added that the butler beside her must have already noticed that his magic produced no normal magical effects. And inwardly, he acknowledged that his own magic unfortunately could not be used for both defense and offense, though neither Kalia nor Viankel understood what he truly meant by that cryptic remark. Alan then instructed them, in a composed but unmistakably firm tone, to remain quiet about what they had witnessed earlier. Although he spoke softly, both Kalia and Viankel could feel the pressure behind his words. To them, the order felt suffocating, almost terrifying. Viankel quickly acknowledged his mistake, admitting in an unusually polite tone that he may have misinterpreted Alan's magic earlier. Kalia, startled, inwardly wondered how her arrogant butler had suddenly become so submissive. Alan leaned back slightly on the sofa, commenting that he was relieved the misunderstanding had been resolved. He then redirected the conversation, telling her to return to the main point. Becoming obedient and intimidated by his authority, Kalia concluded that it would be better to visit him only after finishing her business in the Palatio territory. Alan asked again whether she truly had no special reason for coming. Kalia simply denied it. Alan responded in a calm tone, explaining that he unfortunately had work to attend to and would not be staying in the Palatio mansion for long. Understanding his intent, Kalia stood up, thanked him for giving them his time, and requested permission for herself and her butler to take their leave. Just as she prepared to leave, Alan stated that if she needed anything, she should not hesitate to ask. He also suggested that she visit Duchess Altia, adding that they would likely get along well and that meeting her would be beneficial. Kalia can clearly understand the intention behind his words, feeling as if he were giving her a direct order rather than a simple suggestion. Terrified by the pressure in his tone, she bowed and stated that if he wished so, she would definitely visit. No worries at all. As Kalia's carriage rolled away from the Palatio mansion, Alan remained standing at the front gate, watching the departing cart until it disappeared beyond the bend of the road. His knight, Evan, stood beside him, equally puzzled. Evan quietly asked whether the Zenonia family's young lady had come all this way and what her true intentions might have been. Alan admitted that he didn't know. In fact, he couldn't even begin to guess. The Zenonia family was powerful, unpredictable, and infamous for their involvement in the darker side of politics. Their sudden visit only meant trouble. He then considered a far more dangerous possibility. If rumors spread that he was capable of using origin magic, as Kalia and her butler might have mistakenly assumed, then countless ambitious and starving power seekers would begin chasing him. They would challenge him, test him, and pick fights with him, all in hopes of proving themselves against someone believed to hold ancient power. The thought alone terrified him. As he walked back inside the mansion, he wondered whether Kalia had misunderstood his remarks earlier. He doubted her family would actually visit the Altia household. The Altia and Zenonia families competed fiercely in the underworld, making them natural rivals. Ultimately, he concluded that it would be best if Kalia avoided returning to the Palatio mansion altogether. Inside the moving cart, Kalia finally broke the tense silence. Still trembling, she asked her butler whether what they had witnessed earlier was truly origin magic. Sweat gathered on her brow as she waited for his answer. The uncle immediately denied it, but his denial carried a weight that only frightened her further. Confused, she pressed him, demanding to know why he had reacted with such terror if it wasn't origin magic. The uncle lifted his head, his expression twisted with fear. He explained that origin magic was a type of magic capable of painting its own laws onto the absolute canvas of existence, altering the very principles that governed reality. Such power was permitted only to beings who stood at the highest peak of creation. But what he saw when he observed Alan's magic using his observing eye was something far beyond origin magic. He revealed that Alan's magic did not paint new laws. Instead, it tore the cosmic canvas apart. Alan had twisted the absolute and shifting principles at their roots. The uncle's voice trembled as he recalled the moment. Alan had fixed lightning, twisted it, collapsed its governing law, and even after breaking the principle entirely, the magic had still formed successfully. This, the uncle said, was an impossible miracle, something no human mage could ever hope to replicate. Kalia felt a cold shiver run through her. Everything the uncle described only confirmed the terrifying truth. Ale Palatio's magic was not something mortals were meant to witness. She could still feel the overwhelming force lingering in her memory, like a hand gripping her heart. Then, Viankel suddenly went silent, his mouth falling open as if struck by revelation. With shaking lips, he claimed that behind Count Alan Palatio, he had sensed the unmistakable presence of the Great Forgotten God's Eye, a divine remnant from the forbidden ancient era. The carriage felt suffocating. Viankel clutched his head with both hands, saying that if he thought any further, his mind might explode. He confessed that in his youth, he had immersed himself too deeply in ancient knowledge, earning recognition for his research on magic from the Forgotten Era. That research now allowed him to recognize what he had seen behind Alan. He turned to Kalia and warned her in a trembling voice. No matter what happens, she must never oppose Count Alan Palladio. Someone as insignificant as her had no hope of understanding such a being's intentions, let alone resisting them. Kalia, pale and sweating, finally understood. She realized that she had learned far too much, and that unknowingly she had stepped into a place where she no longer held control. Even without realizing it, she had already become a piece on Alan's board. Her butler advised her to follow Alan's words without question and to visit the Altia household as instructed. Though she knew her family and the Altias were rivals, she could not ignore the fear pressing down on her. She could feel Alan's authority lingering like a shadow, and she knew that whatever path lay ahead, she was no longer walking it freely. 5 months passed quietly after the incident with Kalia, and it had been nearly 2 full years since the children left the orphanage. Life inside the Palatio estate had settled into a steady rhythm until one morning when Evan hurried into Alan's office with an unusually serious expression. Alan, reviewing documents at his desk, asked if Evan had gathered any important information and whether it concerned the missing children. Evan shook his head, explaining that this matter had nothing to do with the children. Instead, he reported that the Zenonia County and the Altia Duchy had formed an alliance. Alan froze in shock. The Zenonia and Altia factions were the two most powerful families active within the underworld, each notorious for manipulation, political dominance, and hidden influence. For them to ally was unprecedented. Evan muttered that such information should never reach the surface world. Only individuals embedded in the underworld could know anything about it, and he was certain the information was accurate. Alan clutched his head in disbelief. He had deliberately tried to avoid entanglement with the 5 great sins, but somehow fate kept pushing him onto paths he never wanted. Now, instead of dealing with simple political tension, he was faced with the combined force of 2 underworld masterminds. The situation was alarming enough to make him wonder whether the entire Asteria kingdom might be heading toward collapse. He then remembered the day he had told Kalia to visit Duchess Altia. A faint dread ran through him. If Kalia had taken that advice seriously, could his casual words have contributed to this alliance? He immediately shook off the possibility, thinking that someone as cold and proud as Kalia would never maintain a cooperative relationship with Duchess Altia for long. Their alliance was likely temporary, or so he tried to convince himself. Realizing that the situation had become unpredictable, Alan decided to prepare in advance. He took out a sheet of paper and began writing a message addressed to Kalia. In the letter, he apologized for his bluntness during their last meeting and explained that his cold demeanor had been due to his poor way of choosing words. Internally, he hoped the letter wouldn't seem like an excuse or raise further suspicion. Once he finished writing, Alan sealed the letter and simply waved his hand, signaling Evan to take it. Evan understood the gesture without further explanation and took responsibility for delivering the letter to the daughter of the Zenonia family, as well as keeping watch for any updates about the children. After Evan left, Alan leaned back in his chair, troubled by the silence in his office. He still hadn't received any word about Radon or Sealrung, and he had no idea what they were currently doing. The only update he had received months ago was from Yudia, who had written that they had safely arrived at their destination. But since then, nothing. Alan worried quietly, hoping Sealrung hadn't gotten herself killed on the streets due to her reckless nature. He had sent her a priceless gift, the gauntlet infused with the essence of the Golden Mane tribe, an artifact that granted a tremendous 20% increase in critical hit rate. Acquiring it required the sin of pride, yet Sealrang had not fallen to corruption. Instead, she had awakened as a powerful wolfkin, a being far beyond ordinary fighters. Alan thought about the secret treasure location he had shared with her, a hidden stash he had originally planned to use as an emergency fund. He reasoned she was talented and resourceful enough to survive on her own and even earn a fortune. A place like the Nation of Fighters, where strength could reshape a person's destiny, Sealrang should have been more than capable of thriving. The scene then shifted to the Nation of Desert Colony, a desolate stretch of land where the wind carried a heavy. Hidden within this barren landscape was a cave, dimly lit and echoing with the faint hum of ancient power. Deep inside the cave stands Sealrang, her entire body trembling from exhaustion and exhilaration. She lowered herself to the ground and took a long, steadying breath, realizing that her trials had finally come to an end. She had received the gift of the Great Moon. For years, she had believed that the essence of the Golden Mane tribe was nothing more than a myth, something the elders of her family spoke of when she was a child, almost like an old bedtime story. Yet now she knew the truth. It had never been a fairy tale. The stories had been real all along. She remembered asking her family long ago what the Golden Mane tribe truly was. They had explained that the tribe consisted of wolfkin, descended directly from the royal line of the Beast Kings, with the Golden Mane tribe standing at their pinnacle. The essence she had inherited was a legendary relic passed down through countless generations, said to grant its wielder the strength equal to an authority. The fact that he had obtained the essence, survived the awakening, and passed through every brutal trial of her inner world, nothing about that could be denied. As the final wave of power settled into her veins, a blazing golden aura erupted from her body, swirling outward like flames given life. She thought deeply of the Great Moon, the mysterious benefactor who had saved her from death in that horrific bioexperiment. Without him, she would have died nameless and forgotten. He had not only rescued her, but had given her the power to seek revenge on the Black Dragon, the monster responsible for her family's slaughter. Her golden aura flared brighter as she made a silent vow. She promised that she would repay every favor the Great Moon had bestowed upon her. She knew he did not want her to fall into the life of an expendable medical gladiator. From this moment on, she resolved to become the strongest gladiator, one worthy of leading the Wolfkin. She would reunite the scattered remnants of the Golden Mane tribe and revive their ancient glory. And above all, She vowed that she would slay the black dragon with her newfound power. Seolrang stepped out of the cave, letting the night air wash over her. The full moon hung high above, bright, silver, and serene. She lifted her gaze and declared inwardly that everything she would accomplish from now on would be for the great moon. A faint smile formed on her lips as she made one last vow under the moonlight. The Golden Mane tribe, the ancient rulers of all beast kings, would rise again beneath their blue moon cult, exactly 500 years after their fall.